Well, thank you so much, Eve, and thank you all for this honor, a great honor, in honor of Count Vergennes. Now, when I was told about it, I immediately thought back to the time in 1953 when I lived in barracks at Supreme Headquarters, Allied Powers Europe, at Rocancourt. It was just outside Paris. And the nicest thing about serving at NATO headquarters was that you had every Wednesday afternoon off. Now, our British comrades played cricket. But if you wanted to, you could go to Paris. I'll never forget my first free day taking the headquarters bus to the Arc de Triomphe and then walking down the Champs-Élysées and going into the Tuileries and seeing Monet's water lilies at the Jeu de Paume, and going on past the Louvre to the Hôtel de Ville, and finally the Place de la Bastille. And on that very long afternoon, there was the giddy, the double and triple sensation of walking into the reality of years of dreams and fantasy in which I'd studied and imaginatively lived in Stendhal's Hôtel de la Mole and in the Pension Varquet in Balzac's Père Goriot, and not least in Jean-Paul Faug's Piéton de Paris. At last, to be a piéton. Now, after the army, I went to live in Paris, studied for the next 6 years at the Sciences Po, and editing the Paris Review in an office on the edge of the Luxembourg Gardens, and living for a year in a river barge on the Seine. And when I was invited to be the editor of a magazine in New York, I asked myself, really, did I want to leave? And then, after we founded the New York Review in New York in 1963, I returned practically every year to Paris or some part of France, from Rouen to Dijon to Aix, always with a deepening sense of a city and a country in which, as nowhere else, the traditions of the monarchy and the Enlightenment and the Romantic era and the invention and reinvention of the modern overlay one another, and yet indeed contend with one another in a drama and a comedy of the mind and the senses. A country, I should add, in which the genius of such writers as Marc Bloch and Albert Camus and Raymond Aron and François Jacob and Gaston Bachelard and Georges Perec all continue to exert for me and for our writers at the New York Review a piercing, a challenging force. Of course, I want to end with the thought that all of us here have a place in those streets and in those corners of France, and that are links with them and with the French life of the mind must not be allowed to weaken. And I hope I am wrong. And I know that I will be told I'm wrong. That when I say that I must confess that I sense that in some ways our country and our perceptions now seem more isolated from France and from Europe than at any time I can remember. And so I feel particularly at home and grateful to be here, celebrating the French-American Foundation, for it is the one organization that, whether in matters of culture or education or economic life, is most devoted to strengthening the relationship between the U.S. and France. Thank you very much.